importer from Canada. I have a business called Forward Specialty Green Coffee Importers where I source competition grade coffees mostly and try to make them more accessible in the global marketplace. And I also have a roasting brand called Rosso Coffee Roasters based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Today I am going to show you a roast profile on the Stronghold S7X, and we are going to roast a beautiful Brazilian coffee from Espírito Santo in the east of Brazil. This is a natural yellow bourbon that is processed and dried in a darkroom. So a unique sort of style of processing that Fazenda and the family are trying on their farm. And we're gonna do it right here, right now. So I have my internal temperature target is set to 180 degrees Celsius. And my settings right now are set to 8.5 for hot air, 6.5 for halogen, 4 on the drum heater, and 8 on the bean agitation. So where I live in Calgary is about 1,100 meters above sea level, and I'm used to generally charging my S7 Pro to about 190, 195 degrees Celsius. We find at that altitude it helps with sort of energy momentum toward the beginning of the roast, and has been successful for us. And I think something that's really important on your roasting journey is to create something that works for you. It's not always recipe based. But look to see what others are doing and then maybe pivot and change what they're doing to best work for you and your environment. So the roast here looks like we dropped in, we're actually reading out at about 155, 158 on my roasting curve, which I think is a healthy place to start. I'm gonna let the first probably 3.5 minutes progress into the roast before making any adjustments. And just kind of watch for some different points on the roasting graph to see what sort of adjustments need to be made. Generally speaking, when roasting with my Stronghold, because I have an S7 Pro, I'm not super familiar with the drum heater as a setting, so I'm just going to leave that fixed and flatlined today. It's going to stay at 4. My variables back home that I'm most used to, of course, are the hot air, the halogen, and the bean agitation. So rarely do I play with bean agitation as too much of a variable. I'm usually looking at hot air and halogen. And on a coffee like this that's relatively dense, I want to give more energy in the early stages of the roast, and then I'm likely just going to staircase down the energy between hot air and halogen in sort of parallel lines. So right now there are 2 points difference between the hot air and the halogen. And just as I decrease the energy as the roast goes on, I'll probably stick to about a 2-point difference unless I see something on the roast that's kind of jumping or making a big change in activity. I really like the application of halogen, especially early in the roast, because I feel I can permeate the interior of the bean. And I think a lot of people forget that in the context of coffee, we're brewing the entire bean. So when roasting, I'm really looking to bring a uniform development color from external to internal of the bean and the lowest amount of deviation between those two colors. Back home, we use a tool called a color track. You might have Eggtron or Lightells or some other system that's giving you the specific hue of brown that your coffee is being roasted to. But for me, the halogen heat source really helps develop the internal of the bean. And in doing so, I believe I can create a lighter roasted coffee that's more well-developed and more full flavor, better extraction, pushing more out of the coffee itself when it comes time to brewing, whether it's espresso or filter. So looking at some of my parameters here, I think at this stage everything looks relatively healthy on the graph. I'm just going to kind of let the energy sources ride. My rate of rise seems to be in a pretty good spot. No issues or concerns at this stage. Coffee looks like it's just moved into the yellowing phase, so I think again a healthy sort of point in the roast. I'm targeting about an 8.5, maybe 9-minute roasting chart. So we'll see how that plays out through the course of the roast here. This is a large batch size, 800 grams out of the 850 gram capacity that they recommend for the S7. I like a larger batch size generally for an espresso profile. I find there's more heat transfer amongst the mass of beans within the bed that often leads to maybe a little more sweetness and a little more body in the final product. I'm going to make just a soft adjustment down 0.5 point on both halogen and hot air at this stage. The reason I made that soft adjustment, so just looking at the rate of rise, the lines, the bean's surface rate of rise looked like it was starting to sort of flatline, and then the rate of rise on the internal probe looks like it was sort of starting to hit that too. I want to see those somewhat coming down on a constant down and to the right. So again, seeing a little bit of action there. Let's kind of hold strong for a second. I think a big part of roasting is not being overly reactive, but paying attention as the roast is happening and using the different indications that we get here on the screen, or if you're plugged into a Cropster, Artisan, some sort of cloud-based software that's monitoring your roast profile, just being attentive to what's happening on the charts in order to ensure, well-developed, properly developed coffees. And I think something interesting that I've played with a little bit on the Stronghold is bean agitation as a variable, and keeping my heat at a constant, and rather using the bean agitation to change the way in which the temperature is or heat is being passed between the beans in the actual mass of coffee. And I think that's a fun way to kind of play around. I don't necessarily know how to explain in depth what happens with playing with bean agitation, but I found some really interesting results where I keep the hot air kind of flatlined at maybe 8 or 9, and then play with bean agitation, moving the actual mass and the bed of coffee that's inside. Okay, we should be hitting first crack here probably momentarily. Everything on the chart looks pretty healthy still. There we go. We're gonna mark that as first crack. And I'm gonna take this out at about maybe 15% development. It's pretty good. I'm gonna take these both down a little bit, and then I'm actually gonna go further with the halogen. I think the halogen is interesting. Toward the end, it can maybe be too intense of a heat source for coffee as it's cracking. And sometimes it shows up as a slightly metallic or almost astringent flavor profile. So too much halogen can be a bad thing, but the right strategic use of halogen can be wonderful for a coffee. We're looking okay. Probably pretty close here. We're at 13% development. The graph still looks pretty healthy. The color here looks pretty good. Let's step these both down a touch again. And take this to 16%, and here comes the release. Mamma mia! Looks lovely. There's still a nice soft hue to the brown. The beans are looking relatively consistent. It's somewhere between a light to medium. I think on a color track this would maybe read out, I don't know, a 55 or so on the external, 56. And on the internal, hard to say from here, but maybe high 40s. So I think this looks like a nice spot where we'll capture and showcase the acidity of the coffee, the complexity of the coffee, and hopefully we're at a point that's fully developed to really show the varietal, the process, and the terroir. There's Roasting with Cole on the Stronghold S7X.